Hi, Amos here with the Kozoi Ray. Now, there's a couple of Tokyo shows ago that I had a listen to the original Ray, and it was Charles's first DSD-capable Ultra Mini DAC, and it's one that, along with other products he's made, designed to be used with a phone primarily, or they can use it as a desktop DAC, and even with a good good quality USB input, and it's powered off the phone, yet still is capable of at least DSD 2.8, and I'm going to find out if this is going to be capable of higher res DSD, as there were some limitations, and of course with the limitations, some phones just wouldn't accept the power draw or sending that much data. So this just arrived in the mail literally minutes ago, and I'm just getting straight into unboxing it so I can have a listen. Now the Ray, if you're not already familiar, is tiny. If it's to give you an idea, here is a FiO's an X5 module. So you see it's basically pretty much the same size. If you flip this around to show the micro USB port, you can see, well, yeah, it's really, really tiny. It will sit under a phone nicely. And well, all you do is you plug headphones in one end. It only has a 3.5mm socket, micro USB in the other, to a phone or a computer or what have you. And there you go. And now we're going to find out more about what it does. There's a single button on there, which on mine I think was power, but I don't remember exactly. 384 kilohertz 32-bit FLAC-Wave AIF MP3 player. So real-time VU meter. That's interesting. There may be some software. Oh, so there's a special player to go with it. That'll be interesting. Download on the App Store. I'm going to check. Since it is the particular feature that it's a DSD player, I don't have much DSD. I certainly don't store a lot of DSD on my phone. It will just fill up the phone in no time. So, instructions. There's a play and pause button. That's it. Fair enough. And so let's just see what accessories it comes with. Well, I guess the accessories box is this one here. And I remember Charles was making some cables, so I'm keen to find out what this one comes with. He gave me a little packet of interesting OTG cables, which he'd made by hand, I think it was. But it looks like we've got a regular set of micro USB to micro USB, USB OTG cable, I guess, and a Lightning to USB, micro USB. Now, I don't think that's an official Apple authorized one, but I will check with Charles and annotate this video if necessary. But he used some trick that apparently some devices use to not use Apple authorization chips, where it would just fool the thing into thinking it was authorized. And it would be good to see if that works. It does work with the. I do know the prototype I had worked with these cables. I haven't tried it with the latest iOS yet, but I did try it with an authorized cable. It worked fine. So that's basically it. Very simple and very straightforward, and now it's time to give it a listen. So I had a listen with the Ray, and it was pretty warm sounding at first, kind of almost excessively so. So with Charles's advice, I gave it a few days of run-in. He reckoned 100 hours, so I just left it plugged into my system for a few days. Got nicely warm and sat there, and afterwards I did most of my testing. Now it's a little bit on the warm side in terms of overall signature, and this regardless of what setup I had it in. And setup is where the main differences were. Now it's a low output impedance device, and of course a micro USB input. So that means it can be plugged into a phone or a full-size system. And it was most sensitive to the quality of the system it was plugged into. But actually not so surprising. More surprising was that it didn't sound bad even if the system was plugged into a phone, but just kind of lost detail. Whereas on my main system, if I plug it into a high quality USB power supply, it sounded better. So let's start on the phone end of things. I mentioned before this funky connector for iPhones and iPads and other iDevices. It uses an official Apple plug. But Charles said it uses, well, I guess what I would describe as an unofficial official method of getting audio off an iDevice. So now I have a prototype Ray, and since then nothing has changed. We've had a new iPhone, we've had a new iOS, and this system still works. So I guess into the future it should be fine. So Charles reckons it's a legit method of getting audio off. I don't know how it works, I don't know the details, so I'm just going to take his word for it. And I don't think he'd make a product that would not work on future iPhones, so we'll leave it at that. So out of an iPhone, it kind of sounds a bit warm, a bit lacking in detail, and but still good. And that's interesting because usually, you know, I would expect that as the kind of the power supply to a device like this is, you know, a lesser power supply is used, the any distortion or whatever becomes more apparent in the output of the DAC. So you can kind of make out what DAC it is by the how it fails to you know, resolve detail. But actually I couldn't. I had no idea what DAC was in this. I couldn't pick it. I actually asked Charles and he told me. I'm not going to tell you because I want to keep it a secret. If he wants to tell you or wants to write it on the line, he can. But just again, the main thing was, as I plugged into a better power supply, just the resolution went up in the dynamics. Now on the other end of things, in the computer, I use an iFi Audio iUSB 3. And that's a high quality USB power supply, quite a sophisticated thing, and it improves the, you know, the quality of a lot of USB components that use a USB, have their power supplied via USB, and it made the Ray jump up quite a bit in quality. Now my main testing method recently was, I initially plugged it into my you know, Studio 6 as a DAC, and then A/B'd it with Yggdrasil using, you know, I used Roon to send signal to send the music to both. Actually, it became, with the HE1000s, it became hard to pick out, well, not very hard, but hard enough to pick out, you know, the differences. I had to really listen and have good music playing. And I don't know if that's, you know, that particular setup, but what was really revealing of the different DACs was these. Campfire Audio's Vegas, which arrived in time for me to have another listen and finish this video. These are very, very resolving dynamic driver IEMs. I mean, really, really resolving. And with these, I could easily pick out the differences, you know, of what I plugged it into and compare it to other DACs much more easily than with my main system, which is kind of a surprise. Now, with the Ray, Charles says he has a very highly regulated power supply in it. And that will be the reason for the my inability to pick out the DAC chip, I guess. And also that's important because it only has 35 milliwatts of power output. In comparison, if you're not familiar, Continental V5, which I also use for testing, 325 milliwatts of power output, so about 10 times the power. Chord Mojo, about 700, so we're talking, you know, 20 times the power. And using these, you know, I could compare how does the Ray sound by itself, and how does the Ray sound compared to the Mojo or with the Continental V5. And I found that the Continental V5, you know, just listening to moderate level with the Vegas didn't make a huge amount of difference. With full-size headphones, obviously, you need something like the Continental V5 that's just a given. But actually it did a surprisingly good job. I mean, you could clearly hear through the Vegas that it didn't have as much detail using a phone, had much more, considerably more dynamics out of the iUSB 3. It just sounded vastly better. But I could also make out that, say, the Ray versus the Mojo, both out of the iUSB 3. Well, the Mojo has the advantage of it has its own battery, it has its own larger headphone amp, it has a lot more computing power, and the Ray sound is still pretty detailed. You know, I got out the good old Chesky binaural recordings, which have a lot of detail buried in them, and the Ray still sounded good. I could still hear very clear, you know, plucking on the cello in the band and some of the tracks of say a Macig Ray's album. But listening through the Mojo sounded more natural. Now, in doing that comparison, the Ray has an inbuilt analog volume control, so good thing is I could very easily do a volume match with it. And I knew I shouldn't get any major deterioration of sound quality using the analog volume control built in. That means in practice, you know, when you use your iPhone, you change the volume control, you're actually changing the one inside the Ray, and it should be the same with your computer. It should be adjusting the Ray's internal volume control and not digitally dithering the volume down to a lower level. So that put the Ray very clearly as being not quite as good as a Mojo, but still very good performance out of the iUSB 3, and enough I could probably, you know, chuck the whole thing into a large box and fool someone into thinking it was a desktop-sized DAC. Was out of the phone was most interesting. Out of a phone, it is still fairly soft sounding as a DAC. It's not probably good enough for the Vegas in terms of detail retrieval. This would be overkill. On public transport, I probably wouldn't be so fussed. I'd be mainly wanting a more relaxed listen anyway. It's probably going to be most useful as something like a Dragonfly Red competitor, especially if you have an iPhone 7 and future iPhones which do not have, you have to get the dongle, and you want something better than a dongle to use, say, with multiple balanced armature IEMs, and that's where the Ray is going to shine. So it's probably going to be the biggest, also a big competitor to, buying. If you already have a smartphone, why would you buy a DAP? Why not buy this and just use put the music on your phone? Depending on how much storage you have and how much you want to store. Maybe you want to use Tidal, so a DAP with Tidal is going to be a bit expensive. Who knows? But I was still pretty impressed with the performance of the Ray. It's still a nice sounding device. It when the sun is shining, like good old Bob Marley sings, which is one of my favorite tracks recently, it was very pleasant to listen with. And so that's pretty much the Ray. And I regret I don't have other devices like the Dragonfly Red to compare it with, or Apple's dongle, but I still think it's a nice device and still nice sounding and very well made. Even down to the headphone socket, which Charles told me that he put in a high quality socket. I mentioned that because as I was plugging headphones in, not these ones, it's got a 4-pin, but plugging headphones in, I didn't feel as good as his other previous models. And he said, nope, I used a high quality socket in this one. So that's pretty much the Ray, and I hope you like my video, and I hope you'll give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed, subscribe, and if you reckon your friends would be interested in the video, share it on Twitter or Facebook or other social media. And if you have any questions, please leave a comment, and I'll see you online.